Kirschner joins us today from The Athletic as we get ready for Hawks Celtics game 2. We'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about the AllStar game, which is going to happen in his backyard in just a few weeks here, I think. We'll see. So the starters got announced, so I take that as another sign that we're just getting a little bit closer to an all-star game that's going to amazingly happen here, to the dismay of LeBron James and others who have come out against it. Chris, welcome. Appreciate you, and great to finally meet you here. Originally from New York, working now in Atlanta, jumped between Florida, a bunch of different places, working on the Hawks beat now for just over 2 years. I'll start with your story, I guess, here before we get into some of the Celtics and Hawks stuff. Well, what originally pushed you towards the sports media career? I see you've done some TV, but now you're in the writing lane.
Yeah, when I was in eighth grade, I decided that sports writing or sports media was something that I wanted to pursue. And then when I got to school at the University of Florida, I majored in journalism. Did a lot of sports coverage there, particularly on the TV side of things. And then once I learned that make much money in local TV, I decided that writing was the path for me to potentially get a lot of money one day. Still working on that, but it does seem like it's more lucrative than the local TV path. But I've grown up just around sports my entire life. I grew up in the Bronx, just miles away from Yankee Stadium, and downtown New York obviously is home of the Knicks. So I mean, that's just a little bit about what I've been doing for my life around sports so far.
So the Yankees this year, are they going to get it together? Because I know I went to Syracuse. I know quite a number of Yankees fans, frustrated Yankees fans, which, probably 10, 20 years ago, you didn't think that would be the staple of a Yankee fandom. But, I mean, you got these big-time pitchers, you got this massive salary, but it's just not converting. And you understand that when it's against the Houston Astros, who are similarly, loaded in terms of talent and payroll and all that stuff. But once it becomes the Tampa Bay Rays, you're chasing from behind. That's got to be frustrating.
Yeah, it is. I mean, the Yankees haven't won a championship since 2009. Obviously, our biggest rival is the Red Sox, and the Red Sox have won several in this time period from 2009. So it is frustrating, and it's also frustrating that, yeah, like you said, the Rays are, they've been in the mix for several years now, even though their payroll is so low. They just do a really good job of building up through the farm system. But I hope it's the year for the Yankees. I do have worries about the pitching staff. They obviously have Garrett Cole, but outside of him, it just seems like they're relying on guys to, reach their highest upside to, be in contention. So I'm curious to see how it's going to work out. The lineup is great, arguably, one of the top two lineups in baseball, along with the Dodgers. So we'll see if the lineup is able to carry them to the World Series.
I'm mildly excited for the Red Sox as a Boston guy, and I was last year too at this time, of course, before spring training got nixed and the season got delayed and all that stuff. That obviously put a damper on it. And then you get into the year and you're just waiting and waiting and waiting. And then the Sox come along. I watched 2 games and I realized, oh, this team just isn't it. And I couldn't get connected for the rest of the year. And last place, no fans in the stands, and the poor taste of the Mookie Betts trade in everybody's mouth. I've never seen Boston, which is through and through a baseball city. And I think New York probably still is too, because the Yankees are probably the most successful team left there. They didn't care at all. No one in Boston cared about baseball last year at all, which I've never seen before in my life. So I'm hoping that's a little different this year. I think there'll probably be some fans back at Fenway. The team will probably be a little bit better. But I know once this excitement of spring training gets by, and if they're not hitting the ground running, it's going to be easy to tune that out again, especially the way, some of us have gotten frustrated with baseball and the pace of play and all those things. But when you have a bad team, it takes it to another level to try to stay locked into it. But I do want to talk Hawks, Celtics. We have this mini series here. For you, potentially, if this was a year where you were traveling, you'd be spending 3-4 days in Boston for a series like this, which is definitely something that's been missed this year. Have you gotten to travel at all? Are you doing this all from home? Are you going to Hawks games?
Yeah, I'm going to Hawks games. No travel. It's
Hmm.
there's just no reason to travel if you're a reporter, just because everything is on Zoom nowadays.
Yeah.
So you're getting special access if you're actually in the building. Going to games themselves, like it doesn't bother me just because of the fact like I live 2 miles from the arena, so it's not like I have to like push through traffic or anything like that. It's just right around the corner for me. So if I lived further away, there I probably would not go to the games just because again everything is on Zoom and you're not really getting anything. You can see some things like during timeouts just to see like how the team is interacting with one another, or if anybody's pissed off or anything like that. But no, everything's on Zoom, unfortunately.
So the Hawks this year, they're not great. They've been banged up. The defense is better, which is a step certainly. When we look at the last few years there and the potential, they've been derailed by a lack of defense. Trey Young, still the kind of guy who is putting up monster numbers on one side of the floor, giving it up a little bit more on the other side. But I was at the game on Wednesday, and I see, Nate McMillan's coaching these two games in Boston here, and he has obviously done something to take this team defensively to another level. But I hear great communication, whether it's from the bench, on the court. Those are the kind of things you hear in an empty stadium, and Boston completely empty, whereas Atlanta, you got a few thousand down there. And I was mildly impressed with their defense. Now, Jason Tatum tore them up, especially late into the fourth quarter. John Collins had that costly foul that helped the Celtics get within 4, but it was like 13 seconds left. So ultimately, pretty strong defensive effort against a team with two superstar wings, uh, possible weaknesses at the guard position where you could get in the switches and stuff and get burned by those guys. Now, they were in the second half, especially. I thought the Hawks were able to hold them to long droughts and hold their own, whether it be Cam Reddish or Clint Capela in the post, and others who were able to rotate in there and give it a pretty, fair defensive shot against this team. Now, they've been inconsistent, but it doesn't seem like defense is the issue this year.
No, I mean the defense has been fine. A lot of the games it's been offense, which has been a surprise because most people coming into the season had the opposite concern, where it was going to be how is this team going to get a lot of stops because they were going to be relying on guys like Cam Reddish and DeAndre Hunter, who's going to be out for several more weeks with a knee injury. But a lot of the focus was on those two guys in particular and the growth needed to be at least an average defensive team. But you've had guys like John Collins take a leap forward defensively. Kevin Herter's gotten better defensively, and Clint Capela has really risen his game defensively and been the anchor in the middle of this defense. So, yeah, I would say that for the Hawks, it's more so about just consistency on offense to have them in these games.
And Rondo's out. Bogdanovich is out long term now. Hunter, you mentioned. Injuries have piled up on this team. And Danilo Gallinari, too, is not hurt, but something's wrong there. I mean, that's not the same guy we've seen with the Thunder and a couple other teams the last few years. Uh, that was a multi-year deal, too. That one's going to hurt them if it continues to go this way. But overall, decent looking team there. The Capela trade, originally the 4-team deal that they did, is looking like a success. I mean, that's just a perfect role, man, for Young, as we saw on Wednesday. And then you got young players abound. Cam Reddish has really turned around. That guy was kind of a laughing stock among prospects with how far he had slid. And now he was comfortably defending Tatum and Brown on that perimeter when he had the opportunity there, and a great four spacer from the corner for them too. So these moves, the draft picks, all the stuff that they're working on over the years is come together a little bit. So in terms of goals for this team this year, probably playoffs, right? Like maybe even above the play-in tournament level there.
Yeah, I mean, even before um, the pandemic hit, Lloyd Pierce was talking about making the playoffs back in March of last year. So early March, right before the Gobert positive test came down, and obviously the league halted. But yeah, this has been something that they've been talking about for over a year now about getting that next step in, which is making the playoffs. For the past couple of years now, they've been rebuilding through the draft, trying to get expiring contracts, bad expiring contracts, and trying to trade them for additional draft picks, which is what they've done over the past few years. This was the first offseason where they actually made significant moves to help bolster bolster the talent on this team. You mentioned Gallinari. They signed him to a 3-year deal. They signed Bogdan Bogdanovic to a 4-year deal, got him in restricted free agency from Sacramento. Chris Dunn hasn't played a game yet, but they got him in free agency as well. They signed Rajon Rondo. Rondo hasn't really done anything. I think it was an egregious error to sign him because he just doesn't offer him the coin anymore. But they did, try and get these moves to help them reach the playoffs. They've dealt with a lot of injuries so far, and that's been a big reason why they're currently under 500 right now.
Yeah, for sure. And that Bogdanovich one was a killer. That's, of all the moves you mentioned, that was the one that was going to move the needle more, especially on the offensive end of the floor. They've certainly missed him. So it's a fun team. I wonder what the sentiment is around that group the last couple of years, though, with the fans and with the team as a whole, because this all goes back to this incarnation of the Hawks right now. That draft night where they take Luka Doncic and trade him to Dallas. And you have these two players in Trey Young and Luka Doncic now, who are two of the best young players in the league. But Doncic last year, in particular, shot out to this, possibly MVP level campaign and almost upset the Clippers in the first round, and was just the heart of the league. And you're getting crazy levels of comparisons, whether it be Larry Bird or possibly one of the best basketball players ever. Some people have said when it comes to Doncic. So you left in Atlanta with this phenomenal all-star, superstar young player in Young, but you're also in a place where you say, could we have gotten Doncic? Did we make an all-time blunder there and missing him, even though we're left with something good there? Like, how do the fans in particular grapple with that a couple of years later now?
I really don't think the Hawks fans, most of them, care anymore.
All right.
Trae has been their guy that they've rallied around. They defend Trae very strongly and passionately. From the Hawks fans that I've interacted with, there's going to be some people who thinks a bad trade or whatever. But for the most part, at least from my interactions, it seems like they don't mind the trade. They love Trae. They think Cam has MVP potential, which I don't see that, but that's what they feel like. So I would just say that for the most part, the Hawks fans have been okay with the trade, whether you agree with it or not. I think it ended up being fine for both parties. Both guys are the best two players in that draft class. Luka being one and Trae being two, in my opinion. But both these guys are all stars, so I just don't see any big time like, holy cow, like this is such a blunder. I can't believe what the Hawks did, like moving to Seattle or whatever, like people want to say. It's at the end of the day, it worked out fine because Trae is a really special talent.
Is that a thing, going to Seattle? Do people talk about that?
Yeah, like some people want to joke about just the trade and just the fact that it was such an egregious error, but
Yeah.
It is what it is. People are gonna complain about everything, so I don't think the Hawks general manager Travis Schlenk is gonna go on the record and say like this is, I shouldn't have done this or whatever. He's gonna defend his guys, and that's what he's done when he's been asked about it over the past couple of years now.
So Atlanta, they lost 7 of 8 coming into Wednesday, and they put together a pretty good showing there. Young, it felt like he started slow and then just exploded late. And on the Boston side, there was all this talk of Jeff Teague coming in and defending him, which I understand. You don't have Kemba Walker. You don't have many other options at guard. You wanted someone who could get on the ball a little bit and defend him there. And like I get the creativity of it, saying that this guy was practicing with Trey Young every day last year, was on the Hawks last season, and so he probably has as good a shot as anybody of defending Young. And hey, that did not come to fruition. Young pretty much just tore him up on a couple different plays. I think ended 2 or 3 against them in the game, and had that final just rip off the crossover from the right corner into the lane, hitting Capela again, which happened about a million times on Wednesday. It was just another flat game from the Celtics, especially on the defensive side of the floor. And the league rankings really don't make that much sense this year, where the Celtics can come into this game 6th in defense and end up looking like that on that end of the floor. And so they have their own injuries too. Smart's out, Kemba's out, Tice was out for this game, all that stuff. But what were your general takeaways on Wednesday for both teams?
I think my takeaway from the Hawks side of things is that, as you mentioned at the start of this, Nate McMillan was coaching last night, and Hawks fans have been very critical of Lloyd Pierce's job. A lot of them don't think he's done a good job this season. And in my opinion, when Trae has a performance like he did the other night, when he's getting to all of his spots, he's making every shot. He's hitting deep threes. The floater is falling. He's drawing fouls. It doesn't matter who's necessarily the coach, just because of the fact that when Trae is at that level where he's in control, I think he had 8 turnovers. But other than that, he was incredible. Even on the defensive end of the floor, which has been a problem for him through his 3 seasons. He's not going to be he's never going to be a lockdown defender. But if he's as active as he was on Wednesday, I think he had a deflection on Jaylen Brown in the post. He was getting in passing lanes. Like, those are the things that the Hawks have been talking about to help him elevate his game on that end of the floor, because we already know what he can do offensively. He's gifted on that end. But if he can get to, just elevate his game a little bit on the defensive end, which I think he was very engaged on that end of the floor on Wednesday, I think the Hawks' potential just increases that much more, just because of that fact that it's hard to build around someone who's really bad defensively, like Young has been. But if he can just improve a little bit, I think they would be thrilled with that, because it just puts a little less stress on the guys who surround him when you're talking about roster construction and all that stuff. As far as the Celtics go, it was clear from the moment the game started that it was going to be an issue for them to guard the paint. When you have guys like Capela and Collins who are really good at rolling to the rim, and they don't have anybody there to protect the rim, it's going to be hard to win that game. So I'm curious to see if Tice is going to make a difference there. At least now they have more size to go up against Capela and Collins in the front court. Interested to see if Kemba is going to make any sort of difference, because it didn't matter which guard was. When you mentioned Teague was guarding him for a little bit, it didn't matter which point guard was guarding him. If it was Peyton Pritchard or Javonte Green or whatever, it didn't matter. Trae was just going to cook whoever was in front of him, so I'm interested to see if Kemba makes any sort of difference there. So those are probably some of the things that I'm looking for going into tonight's game.
Yeah, more fully loaded on the Celtics side for sure. And I was looking at these 2-game series earlier in the year, like the numbers on, are these just all going to be splits? Is this just going to be an adjustment game in the game 2 every time, and it's just split city for the rest of the year? It's actually been a decent amount of sweeps here, whether it be the Raptors sweeping the Bucks yesterday, quite a few of those throughout this season. I think the Lakers had just recently swept the Thunder off the top of my head. I haven't been keeping track of those lately, but it has gone about 50-50 when I did the numbers out on what these series end up being like, whether it's a sweep or a split. This one looks more capable of being a split with the bodies that the Celtics are coming back with, as you mentioned. But I don't know. This Celtics team kind of has been a win-loss kind of team this year, and that's what gets you to 14-14. You mentioned Kemba. That'll probably help them get back in the scoring race that this game ended up becoming on Wednesday. Have more reliable guy that Tatum and Brown can trust to hit some shots, especially off the ball. Tice has been awesome this year, so that one's self-evident that he's going to come in and make some sort of impact here, especially on the defensive side of the floor. But Jeff Teague, when it comes to the ire of Celtics fans this year, it's probably the big 3 would be Danny Ainge, Brad Stevens, who's gotten a lot of heat from fans this year and critics and all these different things. But Jeff Teague tops the list. So Jeff Teague, I didn't like letting Brad Wanamaker go. Now, I don't think it's the end of the world to change the needle on this team too much, but you had a guy here who for 2 seasons developed, got used to the system, played good defense with someone Brad Stevens trusted. And it seemed like, from what I've heard, that he wanted to move on and get a bigger role somewhere else and got a little bit more money in Golden State. So whatever. Kemba's out a month. You need a guy who is a veteran, who can score off his own dribble and shot and be able to hold his own at a point guard spot for long minutes there. And so opening night, he comes out, scores 19 points, gets to the free throw line a bunch. They beat the Bucks, and it's like, all right, here's a hit signing. Jeff Teague, like veteran, former All-Star. Maybe he's got a little bit left in the tank to just get us through this month. And I'd say about 90% of the game since, it's just zero. Like defensively getting torched, offensively not able to get into a rhythm. He doesn't have the ball in his hands a lot, and he can hit a couple of threes on kickouts and stuff if he's set up for those. But effectively now that Kemba's back, Payne Pritchard has emerged, he has no real role on this team, which is why I think people were frustrated when he got those key stints in the third and the fourth on Young and on the offensive side, where he was just generally a mess. So I know last year wasn't great for him. He did a little bit better in Atlanta after the trade. But is this just a guy to you who has nothing left? Like, how does this compare what you saw on Wednesday to what you saw from him in Atlanta last year?
Yeah, I mean, I was very surprised that Teague joined a contending team who was going to need his services, like you mentioned, after Wanamaker left for Golden State, just because of the fact that from what I saw last year, and he only played, I think it was 25 games because they traded for him during the year from Minnesota.
Yep.
I think it was 25 games. But in those 25 games, I mean, he was a disaster for the most part because the Hawks needed somebody to really stabilize the second unit whenever Trae sat. And it's been an issue for the team this year. When Trae sits, it's gone terribly wrong because again they have Rondo and Brandon Goodwin as the two main backup point guards. They're getting Skylar Mays, their two-way player, some run there, and I think he's looked okay in that role. But for the most part, when Teague ended up being a free agent this year, I would have been shocked if the Hawks brought him back just because of how poor it was last year. It just didn't look like someone who, like you mentioned, had a lot left in the tank. He's not a good shooter. Like where the game's going, especially if you're a point guard, you can't shoot. You're not a really good distributor. I don't know what your purpose is anymore if you're a point guard and you can't really do any of those things. So yeah, when I saw that Boston signed him, it definitely caught me by surprise because again, like going into the year, Boston's a title contender and they have someone like Teague who's going to have to play a meaningful role most likely. So it's not really a surprise that Boston fans are frustrated with him.
Yeah, I'm seeing it here in the chat, and some people are saying too, it's not all on him, and I think we do just end up jumping on one of the weaker players on the roster for their struggles and ignore some of the other struggles of other guys. Like Jason Tatum has slipped defensively this year too, which he's taken on a monster offensive load, but when it comes to the defense and the issues there are bigger problems than Jeff Teague. It's just I too looked at his minutes and said, what's the purpose here? Could you go to a Carson Edwards or a Tremont Waters and at least work towards something in those spots, even if you're going to lose anyway? Just a small frustration in a long season so far, those Jeff Teague minutes against Atlanta on Wednesday. You mentioned Skylar May, though, and I went on another podcast for Celtics blog and said, we talked about how Skylar May, a two-way guy, came into this game and made a real impact. So could Tremont Waters, another two-way guy, come in and mimic those minutes and, try to get on the ball defensively and get the ball moving on the offensive end? I was surprised they didn't do that there. So, again, I'm not one of these guys who is hammering up the heat on Brad Stevens, but there have been a few moments this year where you look at him and his rotations, which have gone all over the place, and say this is probably adding to the inconsistency here. I do want to hit on AllStar. I don't care who makes it. I don't care about the votes and all that stuff. Tatum and Brown should make it, and Trey Young will obviously certainly be there. But I do want to talk about this game. So if you're living in Atlanta, Atlanta's kind of been cast as this center of COVID, fair or not. I guess Florida would be the COVID mainstay land down there. But, Atlanta's open, clubs, bars, all that stuff, strip clubs. Like there's just a lot of places where the COVID could fester down there. And Fair or not, the NBA has been wildly criticized for having an all-star game there, and their take on it is that you can go in one night, go out like it's a road game, like the Celtics are down in Atlanta and about to play a game, and head out the next night. And that's how the All-Star game is going to be set up. All the events are in one night. They'll probably be the same protocols that you can't leave your room. Everybody's stuck in their hotel, and then it's just out of there the next day. They'll probably have a hard time on when all the teams need to be out there. So this could go perfectly fine. The money was certainly needed by the league there, but I do side with people who say these are the most important players in the NBA. And if anything goes wrong here and there's any spread whatsoever, if someone comes in with an inconclusive test or a test that isn't caught, and this is spread among the players on the court there, I mean, we're talking about a disaster that could feasibly threaten the season here, worst case scenario. Now, I think it could end up being fine with what they have in place here, but I mean, what's the feeling around Atlanta? I mean, you live there. What's the level of threat that you think this is going to present to the league? And, how is it just being in a city like that where everything's open amid the COVID pandemic here?
Yeah, I mean, the problem is for Atlanta residents like myself is that when you have a massive event like the All-Star game, granted it's much smaller this year. Like you said, the guys are coming in the day before and leaving the either right after the game or the next morning. So that part is fine because like usually for All-Star week there's a lot of parties and stuff. But that's the problem is that when you're living in Atlanta where there's many entertainment options, I'm sure there are going to be other all-star events going on, whether it's sanctioned or not by the NBA. I know Adam Silver was talking about how there's going to be no NBA sanctioned events going on in Atlanta, but I mean, like, come on, like let's be real here. They're going to be events like you see it right here that you're showing on the screen. I mean, like, so it doesn't make any sense to me that, Silver is talking about there will be no events and whatnot. They're going to be events. It's Atlanta. The clubs are going to be popping on Friday and Saturday nights. The bars are going to be crowded, and it's kind of ridiculous in a way because going into the season they were talking about how that safety was going to be important, and yet you have players from all different teams interacting with each other. And like you said, the possibility of there being a positive test or an inconclusive test or whatever it might be could jeopardize the season or at least pause it for a few weeks. So it doesn't make any sense to me. But at the end of the day, it's all about money, and money is always going to win.
Yeah, I saw these posters for these events and just went, "Uh-oh, here we go." Like,
It's
we're just
ridiculous.
asking for one player to end up at one of these events, just step out of line there, and like we're just looking at a disaster. Not only for this event in particular, but for the weeks to come out of that All-Star break. We just had the Spurs and Hornets get shut down again after the league had reached zero. So now the NBA numbers are ticking up just a little bit again, and could you have them tick up more into the second half? My biggest thing was the league doesn't seem to know right now how it's going to make up these games that have been missed already. I think there's upwards of 30 games that have been postponed. And the All-Star break would seemingly be a time where some of those could be made up, or you're going to look at the second half schedule being even more packed or stretched out if the Olympics get cut off or whatever, which seems like a possibility at this point. The season could be extended. But overall, it just doesn't seem like the All-Star game is going to help that goal in any way. So you're going to have an All-Star game and then possibly be just getting rid of some games and going by win percentage and giving up on those as money. Like this, it's creating a different problem where there doesn't need to be one to me. And I'll say this, like I'm up on music. I'm 23, but it troubles me that I don't know who Pooh Shiesty is.
I haven't heard who Shiesty. I know who Lil Durk is, but I do not
Yep.
know who Shiesty is.
I don't like being 23 and not knowing who. Apparently, I mean, he's above Lil Durk here on the poster, so I should probably know who he is too if I know who Lil Durk is. But I can't say I do. So yeah, there's our All-Star. Oh, all right. So last thing here, I do want to throw this at you. John Collins' name has been thrown around a ton in trade talks this year. There's been a report that Atlanta is going to listen to offers on him. I guess the thinking is that he's not going to fit into the future plans of Atlanta, or he's going to be too expensive to retain, or anything like that. I don't know what the sentiment is on the Atlanta side, or how much truth you think there is to the prospect that he could get moved this year. But for a Celtics team that definitely needs a move, some help here, he would probably fit into those plans. There'd be a ton of competition. There would obviously be a big asking price from the Atlanta side. But where do you think John Collins is in the short and long-term plans for this team?
Yeah, I mean the fact that the Hawks are listening to offers on John isn't necessarily new because they were listening to offers last year at the trade deadline. There were a couple teams who inquired about him. So the fact that it kind of got blown out of proportion in the past few days, just because a couple of national writers tweeted about it. I mean, this has been going on for over a year now that they've been
Yeah.
listening to. So there's nothing new there. The they think John is talented. There's no denying that. I mean, last year he's 20 and 10 and shooting 40% from three. This year I think he was like 18 and 8. His numbers have gone down a little bit just because of the fact that there's more talent on the roster now and more people are getting looks at the rim, Capela specifically. But his efficiency numbers are through the roof. I haven't looked in the past couple of days after the Boston game, but for most of the season, he's been the guy who's led the team in on-off numbers this season, even with him being 18 and 8. So for the Hawks, they're not just going to trade him for a bag of chips. They're going to want something meaningful and impactful if they were to deal him before the trade deadline. So our Shams Sharania with the Athletic reported that the Hawks were looking for a high first round pick, lottery level talent at least. The problem with trying to trade John is he only makes $4 million, and when he's obviously worth more than $4 million, it's hard to get something in return that is meaningful for the Hawks side of things. So what I think is going to happen is that the Hawks are certainly going to continue listening to offers. If they do get blown away by an offer before the trade deadline, then Collins is going to be moved. That's just the nature of the business, just because of the fact that when you look at other important decisions that the Hawks are going to have to make, Young is eligible for a max extension starting this summer. Then the following year, you have DeAndre Hunter and Cam Reddish. Kevin Huerter is also eligible for an extension this summer. So you have guys on your team that you have to figure out who's a part of this future. If they are not comfortable paying two guys a max deal, I assume that Trae is going to get the max. I mean, it just makes sense that he's going to get the max. They've been building around this guy for 3 years now. So do you want two max contracts, which is what John is looking for in free agency? And he's probably going to get somewhere close to the max just because of the fact that when you look at the 2021 free agents, he's top 3 probably. He's 23 years old. He has potential to get 20 and 10 every night. Shoots 40% from three. He's gotten better defensively. Some team is going to give him money. I look at Dallas as a perfect example of a team that cleared out cap space with the hopes that Giannis was going to become available. Miami has a lot of money. They were trying to get Giannis. Who else? The Spurs. I think he would fit in nicely with San Antonio. So there are teams that have money who could potentially offer him 110, 120 million dollars this year. I mean, in the off season. So I'm interested to see what's going to happen. The Hawks could decide to play it out, go into free agency, see what that offer is, see what the offer sheet that he signs is, and decide if they want to match or not. If they don't, then they could obviously work out a sign and trade, which is what Boston did this past offseason with Gordon Hayward.
So this is my idea here. I think I'm going to try to appease both sides in a deal like this because there's not a lot of stomach for trading Marcus Smart among the Celtics fans. Reasonably so. Like I I would hate to see Marcus Smart go. This is a guy who's been with the team since I started covering them. Is like their first pick under Brad Stevens. They'd set them up to make the playoffs multiple times, multiple Eastern Conference Finals. But like you said, Atlanta's going to have to be moved in a deal like this. And you say lottery pick, not a recent lottery pick, but there's a guy who went number 6 in the draft, lived up to that. Defense, playmaking, shooting, and signed for 2 years. And then you could possibly sign him after that. That's the kind of player I think Atlanta would listen to. Now, maybe it would take more than this. But you bring in Collins, which is something the Celtics would have to do there. Smart's up after next year. If you're signing Collins, he's around for 4 or 5 years then compared to Smart, who's probably here for 2 years and then gone realistically, which is something we're going to have to start talking about on the Celtics side. So you could get ahead of that a little bit. Bring in Rondo. I know you said he has nothing left, but maybe just as a voice in the room. Better than Jeff Teague, though, I'd say probably at this point. And this could be the beginning of a deal here. Now, does Atlanta have to get some picks on a deal like this? I just think it makes sense from a team building standpoint, using the Cantor TP possibly here, or just matching this money to set this up and then still having the full TP to go from there. Like this is a deal to me that so much sense for both sides. Smart can play alongside Young, help him out on the defensive side of the floor, be a defensive piece for that team. To you, who says no to this?
I mean, I think it's a deal that makes a lot of sense for both sides. The Hawks need more defensive talent on the roster, and Marcus is one of the best backcourt defenders in the league. So I think that is a deal that makes a lot of sense. I've seen some people with Boston trades say like, Collins should be traded for Grant Williams. Who am I missing?
Romeo Langford, Aaron Nesmith.
I mean, you're not gonna like the Hawks aren't gonna trade this guy for spare parts. Yeah, I mean those guys could blossom into something down the road, but you're talking about again someone who can get 20 and 10 every night and shoot 40% from three. They're not going to trade him for again a bag of chips. They want something, and Marcus Smart is definitely someone who, when I've been looking at like, okay, which teams would make sense for John to go to, I think Boston makes a lot of sense. If Boston was able to part ways with Marcus Smart, which I know is tough. He's beloved in Boston. I get that, but when you're talking about adding a talent like John to the roster, it's going to have to cost some sort of price.
So to you, would that be worth it for Boston? I mean, Smart would not be an easy piece to let go. There could be ramifications there defensively, team chemistry-wise, that kind of thing. You lose your heart and soul. That's something you can't measure on the stat sheet and those different kind of things that we talk about there. But Collins, I mean, from what I've seen of him, he looks like he'd be a great fit in this system. You've talked about his defensive improvements, which is the worry with him. Great offensive player, defense, the question. But he's 23. He'd be here long term. He's a shooter, slasher, cutter off the ball. And I know people in the comments are saying, oh, they need a big. He's a guy that can play 5 feasibly in this league a little bit. So there's versatility with him. It's an ability to sign a player you wouldn't be able to sign otherwise since there's no cap space here. And then keep him long term with the restricted free agency. But on the court specifically, do you think this would be worth it for Boston?
I mean, I do. It's he's kind of what I think the Celtics need to, be up there with the Brooklyns and Milwaukee's and Phillies and all those teams. I think it's a move that could certainly put them over the top and have them in the mix starting this year. I think he's really good.
Yeah.
I think good. I know a lot of people don't watch the Hawks. They're never on national TV. But from watching John's career in these past 3 years, I mean, he's gotten better every single year. I think there's still room for him to grow. If he can become a little bit better handling the ball and being more of a playmaker, you're talking about one of the better, well-rounded big men in the league. Because again, he shoots the ball really, really well. So I think it does make sense for Boston to consider something like this. I think Rajon Rondo would be someone who would be enthused to join an actual contender. I mean, the Hawks are wanting to get in the playoffs, but like Boston has title aspirations. So perhaps that lights a fire under his belt. Obviously, I mean, he was brilliant with the Celtics, and maybe that would spark something inside of him to take it to another gear. He was obviously critical for the Lakers in the playoffs last season, so maybe that side of Rondo's game emerges on an actual contender. Who knows? But I think that if we're talking about realistic trades, I think this is definitely the start of the framework that could get something done for both sides.
Yeah, and it still leaves the Celtics with a ton of ammunition to do other things as well. I mentioned this doesn't even touch the TPE, the 28 million TPE. If there's no picks involved, which maybe there would have to be like one future first protected or something like that going to Atlanta, that leaves you with pick ammunition to make other deals. So people are talking about, oh, Collins wouldn't be the center against Embiid and Giannis and the likes. That's true, but the still full front court would still be here. You'd still be able to mix that up somehow. Maybe add another wing, because this Celtics team is multiple moves away with how they look right now. They need more veterans, less young players. And so this double dip idea that I've been coming up with the last few days, where you get Collins and then you still have 28 million to use now or later during the offseason, to me is a no-brainer. Makes the team a lot more expensive, but if you're going for it, if you're the Celtics, you got to ramp up the payroll, add veterans, guys who can contribute right now, because as you mentioned, Aaron Nesmith and Romeo Langford and Grant Williams, and that being the rotation, just is a two-sided approach to this team that isn't working right now. Like Brown and Tatum are ready to go. The rest of the roster is not. And that's what we saw on Wednesday. And we'll probably see it again tonight as this team continues its inconsistent stretch. The Hawks, wildly intriguing. I love watching them. You mentioned not on national TV much. I love when they were against Dallas last week. So that you got an opportunity to see them then. And now again tonight, Celtics Hawks, for anyone watching either side. You get another opportunity to see both of these teams that are fun to watch. Well, the Hawks more so recently. But he is Chris Kirschner. Kirschner. I just completely botched that. I asked you before the show too. Sorry, I'm running out of gas 40 minutes in. You can follow him on Twitter at Chris Kirschner, Kirchner. You can read him on theathletic.com, where many of our guests write. So go subscribe over there and check out his coverage. His Magic City piece way back when, we didn't even get to talk about that. It was a fun one in the aftermath of Lou Williams. And he'll probably be all over the AllStar game coming up in a couple of weeks, and the Hawks as well, as the Celtics continue to be connected to them with trade rumors. So, Chris, appreciate you. Nice to meet you. Hopefully we'll talk to you again here in the future.
Yep, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.